there's a good reason why people can be guarded because sharing challenges in the wrong context, the wrong way, to the wrong person, without the right sort of setup can backfire.
You're listening to the Building Better Futures podcast, where innovation meets inspiration. In each episode, host Eric Hirani journeys alongside notable thought leaders who are shaping the future, cultivating exceptional work cultures, and nurturing the next generation of trailblazers. We aim to spark inspiration by engaging in dialogue with leaders from groundbreaking companies, innovative projects, and exceptional teams. Our goal is to empower individuals to positively impact those around them and leave a lasting legacy of positive change in our communities and society at large. Let's dive in together and explore what it takes to build better futures, one conversation at a time.
Welcome to today's episode. This is a first in our show's history, and I'm so excited. Many of our listeners know I'm an avid consumer of leadership and business books, and I just love that stuff. And today I'm so honored and excited to be joined by our first ever author guest, but also business founder, Ahad Ghadimi, who's CEO and founder of Forums at Work and author of The Turnaround Artist, and also is a YPOer. He and I share that in common, and we've had some great conversations around that. So I am excited to dive into our conversation today, but before we do that, I always like to take a minute to talk about some good news and gratitude. And so I'll ask you, is there any personal or professional good news or gratitude you'd like to share with me and the audience today?
Um, First of all, great to be here. I've been so looking forward to a conversation today, and I've so enjoyed our conversations leading up to this. Something I'm really grateful and I'd say really proud of is there was a moment actually yesterday with my colleagues where I just took a step back and I've just seen how much they've grown and how much they've evolved in a relatively short time, and just their confidence, their and their leadership and their ownership. It was just a really proud moment for me to see like how far they've come and how they've really sort of felt about themselves. And yeah, that's really sort of stayed with me. That just happened yesterday. So
I love that. And especially on the show and to my team directly, I talk to them so much about like not only how much they've grown, and maybe this was true for you too, but how much like you've probably grown as a leader then in that time, because I know I feel that all the time. I'm like, I am a different person than I was 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago. And it's so exciting. I'm glad you mentioned that. And I do good news and gratitudes on our daily huddles. And tomorrow I'm going to share that with our team too. Because that is true for me too. I've seen them grow in tremendous ways. And, from being individual contributors to like true team managers, like managing, to the point where now they have to create their own management structure because they've got so many people on their teams. They're like, hey, I can't have 20 direct reports. I can't have 10 direct reports. I need to have 4 or 5 or 6 and get everyone else in a situation where they can be leaders to the rest of their team. So I'm so glad that you share that. That's awesome.
it's funny actually. So I have a wonderful colleague in Nairobi, Diana, and she just celebrated 1 year with us. And I literally said that same thing to her this morning, just a few hours ago. I said, like, you've excelled so much as an individual contributor, and that's really step one. And now I just really see you evolving into a terrific manager. And so that's funny. I'm looking forward to sharing that with her.
It's great that like that whole leadership journey and path. And this is one of the things that's like great about YPO, right? It's like you have those conversations and you realize how similar the path is, right? Almost like irrespective of business or company or generations, right? Like family owned, individually owned, VC backed, private equity backed, whatever you got. But it's all about that journey and like making everyone a better version of themselves so they can empower the next, people behind them and just like keep growing in that way. It's really cool. And we onboarded a new person earlier today, and I did just like a one-on-one with them to welcome them to the team. They're not my direct report, but they're going to be part of the company, and I like to say hello. And I shared that exact sentiment with them, how like so much of what we do, both as a business, but even me individually, is like, how do we empower people around us to be better community members, whatever that means, right? Because typically better leaders, better community members. So I'm sure we could talk about this for an hour. I don't want to, but I will just share my gratitude. And on show days, my gratitude is almost always to the guests. Thank you for taking the time out to do this. It's I told you this story yesterday when we were doing some conversation, when we had some conversation, and I was, I had your book on my library, and my wife and I were talking about it. I was like, the author of that book is going to be on my show, and it was like such a cool thing for me because I really love this story and the power of truth, right? Like that's really what it was. Like that was a real experience. It's just amazing. All right, great. Well, with that, I want to give you an opportunity to maybe tell us a little bit about the turnaround artist and forms at work. And then more specifically, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? How did you get into this, part of your life, I guess? So go ahead, tell us about yourself.
Wonderful. Okay. So I was born in Tehran, mid '80s. Uh, my parents were very young. I'm the sort of the first in the family. It was right around the time when it was sort of after the revolution, during um, pretty catastrophic war. And long story short, my parents left, essentially fled Iran as refugees, and found themselves in Canada. They were in their early 20s, and really it was a story of just having to start from scratch, just the three of us. And so my father, he actually comes from a line of entrepreneurs, always in the hospitality business, specifically restaurants and bakeries. So I don't know if it's fate or just muscle memory, but he ended up as a baker in a muffins shop, and so he was a baker at the shop, um, and in long story short, he eventually bought the shop, but he actually bought it from a YPOer who will actually sort of circle back to a little later. So he bought the shop, bought another shop, and just eventually sort of built um, his little empire of cafes and bakeries, restaurants, um, and and so that was sort of our journey. And we started off in Flemington Park, which is, if anybody knows Toronto, is, I guess, arguably like the worst neighborhood in the city, and eventually just kept the family kept doing better, so we just kept moving, and so I changed schools a lot and changed neighborhoods a lot, and got a real sort of a 360 of a lot of sort of different neighborhoods and areas in Toronto, um, and went to the French education system. Eventually went to the University of Western Ontario. Did a major in industrial psychology, very sort of passionate about humanities and the liberal arts, and then went to the Richard Ivey School of Business, which is a case study school for, very similar to Harvard, where you sort of do 3 cases a day. And so feel really grateful to have had this quite a diverse upbringing, and a culturally diverse upbringing. And so growing up, firstborn, I spent a lot of my summers after school in the family business, and parents were super hardworking. Grinding is probably the more um, apt description, and so I got to see. I got an education in the power of small business, and how you could sort of start from Flemington Park and sort of end up in a completely different sort of part of town, and how powerful that is. And I also got to see um, the impact on the family, when you have to sort of with the grind, and how difficult it is, and parents coming home late, and parents coming home stressed, and the impact that has, sort of on you growing up. And um, I love what you said something earlier about turnaround artists and truth, because actually when I wrote Turnaround Artists, there was a moment when I was writing it where I thought, really, my goal here is to tell the truth. And the truth doesn't mean not saying a lie. It just means there's like layers of truth. And that's what vulnerability is. It's just like peeling back the layers, maybe layers you don't even know about. Um, and so one element of that truth is I wanted nothing to do with the family business. Nothing. I decided, I think I'm at 14, 15 years old, that I was, my siblings could have it. I, I just, I want to be as far away from it as possible. So my career evolved, and somewhere sort of in my early 30s. uh, my father had an accident, and it was pretty bad. My mom was really scared, and she asked me to come home and help and take over the business. And frankly, it was the last thing I wanted to do. Just I guess from like even the scar tissue of sort of growing up around that, and sort of the challenges and stress that I endured. And also my father and I had very sort of different perspectives on leadership and culture, and so it was interesting. This experience really caused me to put what I considered ideals, my childhood ideals of business and management leadership, to play, and in a place where I really had a lot of sort of strong opinions of how it should be. But it's like, okay, well, here you go. Here's your hand at it. So that was a really humbling and interesting experience. That's what turnaround artist is really about. It's really about the son sort of begrudgingly having to come home, take over, face the father. We kind of helped him. My father was sidelined at home, so I could sort of do what I wanted, at the businesses. Helps from a change management, a turnaround standpoint. Um, but yeah, just sort of that the challenges of the relationship and the challenge of turning around a company culture has been sort of on a certain path for 40 years, at this point. And and so also turnaround is sort of meant to be a a, a guide for people to how to recreate that process. How do you drive culture change? Just this word culture is can be so nebulous, so like vague. What is a culture? What is it? Uh,
Yeah.
what does it look like? How do you define it? Can you change it? Um, and just given sort of the experiences that I had, I want to sort of offer a path and a bird's eye view through a story of how people can replicate culture change in their respective.
I love that part of the book. The setup is like it's I guess it's like a parable, right? It's a story and you're following along in this journey that's like real. And there was something you said in the middle there about like when your parents came home and you could feel that stress, right? And kids do feel it, right? Like I didn't realize this, but I have a very similar background to you, right? My dad's an entrepreneur, comes from a family of entrepreneurs. They immigrated here, and so I was like I'm the oldest firstborn. Saw kind of the hard work and grind, right? That's all I know. And I'm like that too for I guess that reason. Um, but the point I wanted to make about that I think is interesting is like that stress can exist, but if you're able to create the positive culture and work environment, those parents go home to their kids and are energized. And then those and that was like that community and ripple effect I was talking about. And you touched on it. And I love that idea is like and so I'll pivot back to the when I was doing the onboarding call with their new team member earlier today. And I said that to her, and like you almost always have to figure out like I have to like justify the business, but like the business to me is the vehicle to empower those people, right? I don't have that vehicle without it. And yes, it affords me tons of opportunity, right? We're not being naive here. Like, yes, I'm very grateful for all that I get to do, but I really like that part of having a platform that I can empower others, and then hopefully it reflects in the community that they then go out and serve, right? Themselves, being their family and their neighborhoods and all that. So
So I just have to interject. I really didn't know you felt this way, and it's almost eerie because I didn't want to interrupt, but you're sort of vocalizing things that I feel very, very strongly about, like parents going home energized. Like that is like my one fundamental purpose because of the experience that I had growing up. So just hearing you say that, it gave me goosebumps because that is, and then the second thing you said was just the vehicle to empower people using that not in a naive way, in a very practical way, in a very sustainable way, but that's not mutually exclusive to run a great business and to offer a venue and a platform for people to have this sort of rippling effect in society. So super inspired to hear you say that. That's really
no, I
cool.
love it, and that's why I knew this was gonna be a great conversation. I'm gonna not pivot away, but talking about like forums at work. I've got like the first question because a lot of our listeners probably don't know, but like maybe like what is a forum? What makes it effective? And then how did you kind of come on this idea that it would be an effective thing to do at work, right? Because forums for us are very parallel, right? We're all business owners in our forums or in EO. I don't know the exact setup, but at least in YPO, that's the setup. that were all members, right? That are in the forum, not business owners, but members.
Yeah. So a forum. So a forum is a name for ultimately a peer group, a group of peers that get together and have conversations. What are those conversations about? You have a wide range of peer groups, and there's a great academic professor from George Washington University who's like the foremost scholar on this. I really encourage you to read his work, Roman Tarakan. And so what Roman sort of lays out is that there's so many different types of peer groups. Forums in YPO is one of them, and it's basically people of a shared interests, shared challenges, shared goals, coming together to have discussions. And those discussions can range from just professional, they can range from professional, personal. And in the case of a YPO forum, YPO being the Young Presidents Organization, a members organization for CEOs who join under the age of 45, who have a certain level of revenue and employees, to join and have very sort of holistic conversations about their business, personal, and family lives, and sort of the deeper and the more authentic, the better. And so I was not ever really aware of peer groups or peer support groups. You've got them in a lot of different sort of capacities, like Alcoholics Anonymous, for example. That's a peer support group. They get together because they're working through addiction. And then you've got sort of these business ones where you sort of have your sort of personal board of advisors. And so it's funny, I was telling you the story about my growing up years, and the gentleman, Michael Bregman, who sold a lot of these sort of restaurants, cafes to my father. He's like a prolific YPOer, bit of a legend actually in Canada. And so he was a mentor growing up. And I think when I was 17, I used to go and see him and have coffee. And he told me about YPO, and I didn't know what it was, but I'm like, okay, I'm gonna join one day. That was so I sort of put that away. And one day, my the early 30s, I kind of realized I kind of came back to me, and I realized I qualified. And kind of a full circle moment, because I had him to write me a recommendation letter. But when I was joining YPO, the first thing they said to me, that you have sort of a membership interview, and he said, it's all about being vulnerable. Vulnerable. I mean, I couldn't spell the word at the time. I didn't know what it meant. And very, very similar to you, Eric, I grew up with very hardworking, committed parents that just sort of got on with it. There was never, so it was actually never really modeled, this idea. I mean, does vulnerability mean you complain? I mean, how do you, what does that even mean? What does it look like? So vulnerability, sure. If I could join YPO, I'll join. Vulnerability is, whatever that word means. And I remember joining my first forum, and they're explaining, I went through the training, and I'm like, okay, well, you got to sort of talk about your challenges and talk about insecurities. I did not have that muscle. I did not have that model. I just didn't know how to do that. And quite frankly, being the youngest person in my chapter, and being in a forum with people doing like some really incredible things, blasting satellites into space and running very well-known global brands. Like imposter syndrome was right there with me, And so the last thing, and I didn't know how this thing works. I'm like, okay, well, next thing they're gonna think is, this person, I'm gonna share about my challenges, and they're gonna say, this guy does not belong here. Kick him out, like he slipped through the cracks. So that was a really challenging and awkward moment for me, that night in this sort of big office tower in downtown Denver. And I don't know, I took the plunge, and I shared. And it was just really interesting in that moment. Sort of some of my colleagues, I'll never forget, they're like, oh yeah, I've been through that. One person's like, I'm going through that right now. So the challenge, I was like, really? You're going through that? And somewhere in my mind, I thought, oh no, you sort of get past these things. And it's kind of like you were saying earlier, there's like these universal journey, this universal concept of no matter what industry you are, what stage of your career, business you are, but you'd never know until you opened up and shared it. You keep it inside. If everybody keeps it under wraps, and you could never know. And that's the power of these forums, is you create the safe space. You follow a very specific structure that allows for you to confidently and without recourse share and talk about it, and only for you to realize, wow, we're all very much dealing with the same thing. And so the first thing that does is it gives you this kind of cathartic feeling like, it's not just me. And this voice in my head that's like really beating me up. And especially if you're a very driven, type A entrepreneurial person, that voice is, it could be a great motivator, but it could also really be difficult. It really sort of beats you up all the time. And you realize, oh, I am actually doing quite well. And this is actually very common. And this is really par for the course. And you kind of voice and quiet down a little bit. So that was my first experience with the forum, and just this big aha moment for me was a few things. One, this is what CEOs do. Like, I just sort of thought there was some Herculean effort where you just sort of lone ranger, get it done and make it happen. And like, oh, they get together and they have these sort of feelings, conversations about their feelings, and their emotions. Like, who knew, And the other thing I thought was how come we don't know about this? How come nobody knows about this? And how come it's just CEOs? Because I guess others could probably benefit from this as well.
That and I you use the word vulnerable, and, like, that is not my strength. I know that, and, like, I'm really working on it, and it's amazing how, as a team, like, I'm gonna keep referencing this onboarding call today, but I guess so I was speaking with her, and I just told her, like, I was telling her about some of this stuff in the val and, like, kind of the culture we're trying to create here, right? And it's that if they trust each other and they're vulnerable with each other, they're gonna elevate each other, whereas if you're closed off and trying to if you're so afraid of the repercussions of something you've done that you can't even share it with someone, then there's no way for you to, like, improve or get any feedback on it. So, the vulnerability is huge, and I do love the idea, and while we don't do anything formal here, like forums at work, although maybe not yet, but there we definitely try to bring that vulnerability to work, and, like, I would just for listeners, who maybe not all are either CEOs or entrepreneurs, but are mostly, like, either part of a team or managing a team, like, trying to be vulnerable and get your team to have some vulnerability and build some trust is, like, a really powerful way to get more out of everybody and raise the energy, Sometimes you're so shielded and guarded that everything feels negative, and it doesn't need to be. Even problems are really like, they're opportunities. They're just disguised opportunities.
Absolutely. And look, there's a good reason why people can be guarded because
Yeah.
sharing challenges um, in the wrong context, the wrong way, to the wrong person, without the right sort of setup, can backfire. And that's why we do it. We're very protective because we don't want that recourse. I mean, yes, to feel psychologically safe means to feel like you can share something and there won't be any negative impact on your reputation, on your job and your career, and I think that's what forums and peer groups allow for. I think what it does is it's a right setup to allow people to learn how to do that and to do that in the right sort of in the right way so that that trust builds and that confidence builds to share more and more. And like you said, by when we have these sort of challenges or negative thoughts or fears or worries in our mind and we don't express it, it really amplifies, kind of bounces around in there in your head, and it's just so much worse. And it's what therapy is about. If you're able to sort of say it out loud, it sounds completely different, and you can actually get help, and it even changes your perspective. So there's always we all know that's what catharsis is. It's this feeling of relief when you share something out loud. But how do we set up the right context so that we can do that in a very productive way? Um, that people feel comfortable doing it, and then when they do it, it leads to a compounding of more trust and more connection and more support, and not the opposite. Because both are possible.
Yep. No, I totally agree. So that was great. Can you share, like, so we just went through what forum is in a overview level type way, but can you share, like, a story where maybe you've seen how a forum, like, transformed an individual or an employee, just from being in part of a forums at work type of program?
Yeah. So when I joined YPO, I was leading a collection of companies. I was doing turnarounds, and I was doing actually family business succession. So taking over businesses from retiring business owners. And I was very sort of opportunistic in that I ended up in industries I knew nothing about. One of them was an industrial. Um, uh, it was they're producing industrial water filters made out of fiberglass reinforced plastics, and this was in Spartanburg, South Carolina, big industrial hub in the South, and even I think one of the top 10 sort of murder capitals in the United States. So a pretty rough, challenging place. And this facility that I took over, which was insolvent at the time, had been losing millions of dollars. It was just like on its last leg. I got this opportunity really because they had just given up on it at this point. And most of the employees were actually ex-cons right out of the South Carolina penal system, because A, they had a hard time getting hired, given their past, and B, we had a hard time hiring people because a fiberglass manufacturing facility with all the resin, that's a very difficult place to work, very toxic, like from like a chemical standpoint.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know anything about this industry, and so my goal was to really get these few hundreds of people to really work together and care about what we were producing, because we were producing big industrial water filters that go to the Arctic Circle, like all around the world. And if there's even a pinhole leak in these, you have to send someone out there to fix it. And so the whole idea was like taking, a couple hundred people, putting them in these small groups and helping them sort of build relationships, trust, open communication with one another, and using this time so they would meet regularly once a week, and using that as a venue for them not only to build relationships but to learn and grow and build leadership skills, communication skills that are just going to make them more effective um, uh, team members, and more engaged team members. And what I really got to see in that experience is people who really, I mean, from didn't really care. I mean, and I didn't really, it didn't, it was just a job for them. And to people who just came to work with just tremendous passion and gratitude. That was a really interesting thing of how grateful people started becoming for one another, for the company. How there were just fewer and fewer conflicts amongst people until there was none, because we were so there was something very sort of manual about building these things. So people had to really collaborate, communicate well together. And when I first took over, there was a lot of friction. There was a lot of challenges. There was a lot of people walking off the plant floor, and it was interesting to see how through this process, people just started um, communicating with one another differently, taking more initiative, taking more leadership, and just something as just simple as people just being happier, on the plant floor. And I have so many examples, but I think the thing that always just stays with me, and you mentioned it earlier, with people sharing how, I mean, the impact of the workplace was obvious. I mean, you could just see, the throughput, the lack of wastage, how much faster we produce things. But when I took over, we were 180 days late on average for all of our projects. How that came down to zero, and we started getting even ahead of the curve on deliveries. But it's when people started talking about how their family lives had changed and how their relationship with their wives had changed and their children. I mean, that just sort of blew me away. And that's when I sort of knew that this was really my purpose, was to take what we had created there and make it available to the maximum number of people.
And that's like, I'm gonna say something that's not me, but I think a lot of people will think this way because I did, right? Before I really understood the power of forum and teams and peer groups. It's like, yeah, that sounds all well and good, but like, is it really possible? Is kind of the question in people's minds. And like, what resistance do you face when trying to do that, right? You have 100 and something ex cons. is that really a group of people that you can get into a forum and get vulnerable and start like, hoping that they'll expose themselves? And obviously, yes is the answer, but like, tell us about the resistance you faced at that time and like how did you overcome that? Because I think
Look,
forget ex-cons, even the regular everyday, you know, employee probably is like, I'm not going to talk to you about my problems. Like I'm here to work and for a paycheck and I'm going home, like kind of situation.
yeah, so there's two things I'll say. One, at this point, we have users in over 41 countries. Kind of lost track, but it's like we've like we've rolled this out in every region around the world. Um, from California to Nicaragua to actually very popular in West Africa, to Japan, to the Middle East. And it is very, very common. People will always say, yeah, but have you done it in Vietnam? Yeah, but have you done it in the construction industry or the venture capital industry? Or, we just rolled out the biggest law firm in the UK. And so, and the oldest. So it's, I've just come to accept the fear, the resistance, the skepticism, um, and it's interesting actually. I've actually come to enjoy it because on on the flip side of skepticism is surprise. The more skeptical someone is, the more surprised they are. And look, I'll be honest. When I launched this thing, my goal and my vision wasn't necessarily. I wasn't thinking about West Africa. I wasn't thinking about Japan. I was very, very sort of U.S. centric. It's where I lived and it's where we started. And I didn't know how this was going to sort of work in Lagos, Nigeria. I didn't know where Lagos, Nigeria was at the time. So, but with every successive iteration and sort of rollout, I just really did realize how universal it is for people to feel comfortable to share their challenges, to be heard, to be respected, and that these are fundamental human traits, and that we do very little to know. There's very little to no sort of venue or process or structure to actually do that, and so people are so incredibly unfamiliar with it, and that's where a lot of this sort of skepticism comes from, is because a lot of people just haven't experienced it. A lot of people have not experienced the ability to really share, be open, share challenges, especially in what is arguably the most stressful part of our lives, workplace, because it affects our livelihood. If something goes wrong, you be fired. You're A lot of workplaces don't necessarily have great cultures. Often much worse. So I guess that's sort of the first part. And the second part is what we've also learned is how to start in the shallow end of the pool and slowly, slowly walk towards the deep end. We don't dive into the deep end because you'll drown. So we just sort of how to sort of take people very comfortably, step by step, because trust is a process. And how do you get people to little by little learn the tools, the techniques, and the process of building trust together so that you feel more comfortable to open up. And that is sort of an important part. I think that's when people start going through this process, they realize, oh, this is something I didn't know I needed. And now I can't imagine living without.
Very nice. And I know it's a complex process, right? And I think believing and like taking that leap of faith is a big part of it. But for our listeners on the episode, right? And some may be in a position to affect change, some may not be, right? And you deal with people all across the organizational chart, right? Top to bottom. Like, what's one thing you think any listener to this episode could take away and be like, "Hey, this is an easy, like, just work on this or practice this, and your teams will be better for it, or you'll be better for it." Like,
In fact, it's actually not complex. And I think that's the beauty of, and maybe it's because just for like thousands of forums launched, so many different experiences. I think there's something, Mark Twain has this great quote, sorry, I wrote you such a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short one. So the
yeah,
more you get to know something, yeah, the more simple it becomes because it's actually quite simple. Really just comes down to creating a psychologically safe environment. How do you do that? It's just two simple elements. One, equality in conversational turn taking. So if you're having conversations with someone in a meeting, really being an adamant here, being adamant about each person having the same amount of time to talk. 1 minute each. Time it, you know. Firms that work, we time everything. So it's very like a recipe, it's measured. Everybody has the exact same amount of time to talk. The second thing is just ostentatious listening. So that means like being so obviously paying attention. Your phone is upside down, it's off. You're not taking notes, you're making eye contact, you're really engaging. Those two things, just to start practicing that, I can't overstate how powerful just that is, because we don't do it. And when doing it, like listening, there's something that I've called zone 3 listening. Zone 1 listening is, you're asking me a question, I'm just in my head. And it's actually helpful in an interview because I'm thinking about what I'm going to say as you're asking questions. So that's good for zone 1 listening. But when you're in a meeting discussing with someone, you probably want to be in zone 2, but more importantly, zone 3. Zone 2 is I'm hanging off every word. I'm listening to your words. I'm not in my head. I'm focused on it's you and me, and we're in a tunnel. That's zone 2. Zone 3 is I'm listening to the emotions of what you're saying. Yeah, I'm listening to sort of what you're not saying, what's between lines. And so practicing just that creates psychological safety, because we all know what it feels like when we're talking to someone and they're not paying attention or they're
Yeah.
checked out, right? And that's common. So there's doing the opposite is already very unique and rare. And so, but doing that and doing that regularly, and that's what essentially forms of work is just the cadence and the structure and the commitment to do that on a regular basis. But anybody could do this. It's very sort of available to us all.
I love that. And yesterday when you had mentioned about the equality of time, I was like, that was me consciously like, I wonder if we do a good job of that. And I sometimes think I take over meetings and I try not to, but even when I don't want to, I think I still do sometimes, and it's hard for me. So that was something that you said to me yesterday. I made a note of it, and I was like trying to figure out how am I going to be better about that? Because I want to hear everyone's voice. Everyone's got really good ideas. If I'm in a meeting or a conversation, it's typically with very bright people. Like I want to hear from them, and I just want to make sure I'm giving them the opportunity to do that.
And look, you've achieved what you have because you're an entrepreneur. So that means you take initiative. That means you speak up and you're vocal. And so that's what's got you here. It's fantastic. I mean, you wouldn't have achieved what you have had you not had that ability and that capacity to do that. And yet, to your great point, now it's time to sort of do the opposite. So this
Yeah.
now is that to speak last and to ask questions and to let everyone else share and to say maybe the least and give everybody that airtime. So it is sort of an important changing of gears for leaders as we're growing and scaling our businesses and putting more attention on building a culture.
Building the team. That was awesome. Because you mentioned that Mark Twain quote, and I'm a quote guy. So, do you have like a favorite quote or a mantra you subscribe to?
I think a quote's come to mind, but I'll tell you something I've just been thinking about a lot, especially again as an entrepreneur. And look, our we have a very simple goal, and our goal is to put 1 billion people in forums, um, and very specifically to put 1 million people in the next 36 months in forums. That's about 5% of the YPO market uh, or community, and 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 we've taken very big strides in doing that. But sometimes you sort of look at this goal and you're like, you sort of look at the top of the mountain, you see how far there is to go. But I think what I've been thinking about a lot is actually that's fine. You got to look at where you're going, but actually look back at how far you've come. And that's really something I've been thinking about a lot, and really giving oneself. We talked about empowering and encouraging our colleagues, but what about us? And encouraging ourselves and empowering ourselves, because the amount of energy, stubborn persistence and resilience that it takes for us to do what we do every day. So that's something a mantra I've been thinking about a lot is giving to myself. And Snoop Dogg has this great song. He says, I want to thank me. And so doing that and really seeing how far I've come. It's right. I think about, I ask myself, have I made progress in the last day, in the last week, in the last month, in the last year? And those are resounding yeses. And when I realize that, it fuels me to take bigger leaps and bounds, up that mountain.
It's funny because it's like we're on the same brain length here. We just did our quarterly meeting with the executive team, and we came up with their BHAG. And my first message to the team was like, "But that is not what you can focus on because that's going to seem impossible, right? Like that's a BHAG for a for those that don't know, BHAG is a big, hairy, audacious goal. And it's supposed to feel almost impossible to attain. That's the point of it. And really, what we have to figure out is, hey, what are the small steps that get us there, right? Let's do the one thing. And to your point, I'll probably mention this during our next quarterly retreat. Like, look how far we've come from, right? And I was telling you earlier, a lot of my executive team, where individual contributors are now like true team managers. I mean, that's a big step for them. So, I and that quote, I love it. I want to thank me. I'm gonna make that the quote. All right, last question before we jump into the lightning round. And I think you just gave us the answer actually. So the vision for the next decade, it's like 1 billion people in forum. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, very simply. So look, there is and we have a very clear path, very practical path to getting there. You know, if every YPO, EO member, and Vistage and all these other sort of peer groups, CEOs who are in forums, if they brought forum peer groups into their organizations, into their people, that already gets us about 350 million people. So and so the way we've built our platform is we actually don't have a paywall. So we will never turn someone away for because of cost. So there is no paywall. I'm a dedicated meditator. I do Vipassana meditation, the 10-day silent meditation retreats. And in those
Oh wow!
meditations, I've
Wait,
done
what
one
was it
every
called again?
Vipassana.
My sister's friend just did it. 10 days. He was like, no phone. He's been doing it every year for. I might connect you guys. I don't know how common it is, but
It's
you
it,
know,
it's wonderful. It's really I've done 15 of them. So one a year for the
wow.
last 15 years, and I'll do one for the rest of my life. And one of the things that inspires me about it is they you there's no paywall. You pay what you want, what you can, if you want. And so it's as accessible as something can be. It's so accessible. And so cost is not an issue for anybody at that point. You know, we're about to put I think it's something like 240 people who have just been laid off into sort of forums
Oh
to support each
wow.
other. So for us, you know, that's one. And then we've also sort of made it so simple and easy that anybody anywhere in the world, any level can be part of one. Um, so so now it's just a matter of commitment, execution, bringing on the right people, and just every day waking up and doing the same thing. And so we feel like if we can tap into these networks of people who are leaders, decision makers who are already doing this, um, and put and give them the opportunity to bring this to their team members, employees, that gets us about 350 million. But then we also have forums at home. And so that allows those people to bring this to their families and have forum style conversations with their children and their spouses. And so that easily sort of gets it past the billion person mark.
I'm offline. I will talk to you about that. I think form is such a powerful tool, and it's all about how you implement it, really, right? Like we've been in bad forms, we've been in good forms, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
And it's all about the people. But it comes down to the three things you said earlier. And so I just want to like for the listeners, just the like being vulnerable. And it is so hard, and it's really a learned skill. And it takes practice, just like anything else that you want to get good at. It takes practice. The being conscious and equal time sharing for talking, right? Like there are people on your teams, there are people you talk to, there are people in your families that are just quieter by nature. Doesn't mean they don't have something to share or don't need to talk, but like they, maybe be more conscious about gifting them that opportunity and the active listening. And I love that. Before I let you go, I do want to go through my lightning round questions, if that's cool.
Yeah, sure, of course.
I'm gonna pick three of them. I'm gonna ask you this and you can't tell me your book. So what book changed the way you lead?
Maybe The Art of Possibility. I think it's by Ben Zander. He's the music director of the Boston Philharmonic. And one of the things that, there's a lot of beautiful, it's one of those books that you just don't want it to end. But one of the things was you start off with everybody, giving everybody an A plus. So everybody starts with an A plus, and communicating that with them. to them, so that you're starting with an A plus, and you have the opportunity to sort of
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
keep that. And I think and a whole bunch of other sort of elements from that book. But I love that book a lot.
What's the and this doesn't just have to be personal. I'm curious actually, because you have so much exposure to so many different CEOs. What do you think is the hardest part of being a CEO?
Asking for help, being hard on yourself, just this dogged stubbornness to just look. I mean, I think Elon Musk said, being an entrepreneur, which is not, I mean, you could be a CEO and not an entrepreneur, but like it's like chewing glass and like looking into the abyss. And it really can feel that way. I mean, I've had many moments where that was truly my experience, and feeling alone in that process, or and just being so hard on yourself because you're trying to do the impossible and you won't take no for an answer. So that those are some of the things that sort of been difficult for me.
No, yeah, I love it. I'm writing these down just so you know, just because I'm gonna read The Art of Possibility. I have a book list and I love adding books to it. And then the last one, finish the sentence. Every company should blank.
Every company should create um, the time and the space for their colleagues to build stronger relationships, connections with one another, to learn with and about one another, um, and to feel like they're really growing, um, and are on this sort of lifelong learning process together. I think every company should do that.
And I'm gonna refer back to our conversation yesterday, but there was like in my mind, and not that it was specifically forums at work, but we had always talked about like the forum mentality and how do I get our team like, and we do some things. Like I think we do a pretty good job of creating some safe space for everyone to talk and like be vulnerable. And but the thing that like you really blew my mind with yesterday was when you were like, well, it could be cross departmental and also cross like I don't know what you call it, but like cross like hierarchy level, right? And I was like, wow, could you imagine if like, whatever the head of accounting was talking to like a field person, right? And the amount of probably information that both of them possess that's important to one another and almost never gets communicated. And like, so I love that idea of like building the stronger relationships and creating the time and space for them to just talk to, like to be together, you know?
Actually, yeah, just if I could say quickly two things
Yeah, of
about
course.
that.
Yeah.
Look, so first, you're absolutely right. They're each of them are like a gold mine of knowledge and data by virtue of
Yeah.
what they're doing, and them feeling comfortable to open up, to share, to disclose these things, ask for each other, ask for each other's help, feel open and comfortable to do that is incredibly powerful. And so actually the second thing is a question. Would you ever hire or work with someone like a direct report that you didn't trust or like?
No, the trust part is so important. I agree with you. Yeah.
If you're gonna hire an executive, someone's gonna work on you, and you didn't trust them, you didn't feel comfortable, you trust them. Yeah, like, would you hire them?
No.
No. So what's interesting is you get to make that choice given where you sit in the
Right.
organization, but nobody else does. So often someone else just sort of arrives and they're your colleague, and now you got to work with this, but you don't get to choose. So and now and maybe you have different interests, you have different, but so there's been no sort of mechanism to build deep trust with one another. And what I've learned is whoever you put in a forum, in a peer group, and you take them through the recipe of structured conversations, conversational turn taking, walking them from the shallow into the deep end of opening up, these forums, these peer groups are like relationship incubators or relationship accelerators. And so whoever you put in there, they're we always joke, they become a gang. I mean, they become so tight, because you've created the environment, the conditions. And so it's it shouldn't be any surprise that people often have conflicts because they didn't get to choose who they want to work with. They don't feel comfortable with them. And there's been no time, effort, or sort of process or very proper to build that. So now they're just hoping they have a few things in common and they just somehow gel. And sometimes they do, but that's sort of just to respond to what you're saying.
No, I love it, man. And this is the kind of stuff that just gets me so excited. 'Cause it's all about, like, I always think about, like, best version of them, right? Like, what is it like, to themselves, like, I want them to be the best version of themselves to themselves, right? And, I think it's so cool.
What could be better? What could be better than to work in an environment where everybody feels like they're day by day they're growing. I mean, it's really it's that's what evolution is. We're made to grow. It's why we climb mountains. It's why we lift weights. It's why we run marathons. We just want to get better. And if the workplace can be that venue, and us as leaders can make that available for people the way we do it for ourselves as YPOers and leaders who pursue this, then how could you not be successful? How could you not be happy? And how could people not go home feeling more energized for their families?
Yeah, I love it.
You
So, I'm gonna on that note, I'm like, that's all the time we have today. We'll include links to the resources mentioned, in today's show's, notes. And thank you again, everyone, for listening, and keep an eye out for our next episode. And thank you again. That was
This was
awesome.
so much fun. I didn't see the time go by. Thank you.
No.
I really enjoyed it.
This episode is brought to you by Infinite Consulting Corp., your go-to firm for MBE certified project and construction management consulting. Discover how Infinite can help you build a better future at infiniteconsultingcorp.com.